There are 1,000 different tutorials on how to build a PC, so for this video I want to delve into a more niche case. If you want the TLDR, I linked several PC part picker lists in the description that suit different budgets. Even with those lists, there may be some parts you might want to exchange. So, for the rest of you sticking around, I'll explain the considerations you have to take when choosing parts for a VR-focused PC build. I'm making this video to celebrate the months I've spent researching the best PC for VR, then building it myself, thanks to the generous donations from my patrons. So think of this as my way of giving back. This video doesn't require you to know how to build a PC or what parts are involved, so here's a summary of them as an analogy to the human body. Again, there are plenty of other videos out there explaining how to build a PC, such as this recent series by Paul's Hardware. And of course, a PC designed for VR will totally tear through non-VR games at high resolutions and frame rates as well. By the way, what I'm about to say in this video isn't just conjecture. I'm not only using internet research, but also benchmarks I performed myself to back up my findings. While I was originally planning to include them in this video, I may make a separate video for that because it would certainly take a long time to put together. An important thing to keep in mind for a VR PC build is what headset you are using. I've been fortunate enough to try out a plethora of headsets, but the only two I can recommend right now are the Quest 2 and Valve Index. The Index has 4 refresh rate options, 80Hz up to 144, while the Quest 2 has 4 refresh rate options from 72Hz up to 120. However, as Tupper notes in his Best PC for VR Chat post, a headset with a direct connection to the graphics card, such as the Valve Index, is preferred for the smoothest PC VR experience. The Quest 2 uses a single USB cable that requires video compression, which increases latency and reduces picture quality by introducing compression artifacts. The Quest 2's screen is also technically higher resolution, but you probably won't be running it at native res. Not only because it's not the default preset in the Oculus PC app, but also because the USB 3 connection does not have enough bandwidth to send even the lowered res video signal uncompressed. Running at higher resolutions on the Quest 2 will not only make frame times less stable, but will also introduce more compression artifacts. The Valve Index is able to receive an uncompressed video signal through its DisplayPort cable. For most people, however, I have a hard time recommending the Valve Index unless you know you want base station full body tracking, like with the Vive or Tundra trackers. Just know that you're going to have to pony up quite a bit of cash. For everyone else, I'd recommend the Quest 2 or waiting for the Quest 3, which should release later this year. Choosing parts for a VR build involves more considerations than for a regular gaming PC. Thankfully, one of the easiest choices you can make is that of the processor. AMD's Ryzen 7800X3D, which just released, is clearly the best processor for VR, both from a performance and value standpoint. What makes it so special is that it has an absurd amount of L3 cache. For those of you who don't know, there is a hierarchy of storage for computers. Long-term storage, like hard drives and solid-state drives, or SSDs, hold more capacity and are cheaper, and hold it for long periods of time, even when you turn off your PC. But these forms of storage are much slower than RAM and cache. Unity has a bug where it benefits tremendously from large amounts of CPU cache, probably more than it should. Considering that many, if not most, VR games are made in Unity, including VR Chat, Boneworks, BoneLab, Blade and Sorcery, among many others, this CPU is a no-brainer for putting in a VR-focused PC build. The other great thing about this CPU is that, unlike Intel, AMD supports their CPU sockets for several years, this current one at least through 2025, meaning if you want to upgrade your CPU in the near future, you won't have to buy a new motherboard and RAM. If you want to save money, you can get the last generation Ryzen 5800X3D. You will not only save money on the CPU itself, but also on the cheaper compatible motherboards and RAM. The downsides are that your PC will be slower for gaming. If you ever want to upgrade your CPU, you'll need to upgrade your motherboard and RAM as well. TLDR, Choose the 7800X3D for the latest and greatest, with the ability to upgrade your CPU without replacing your motherboard. The 5800X3D is still awesome value. The other super important component of any gaming or VR build is the graphics card. This, unfortunately, is a bit easier of a decision with a VR-focused build. I say unfortunately because you pretty much have to go with an NVIDIA card here. Why? Drivers. Despite some AMD cards like the 7900 XT besting the equally priced NVIDIA 4070 Ti in rasterization performance in traditional games, it falls noticeably behind in VR titles. AMD doesn't optimize its drivers for more niche cases, and when there is an issue, which happens more often with AMD drivers, it takes longer to get fixed. For example, VRChat recommends you use this start option if running an AMD GPU to force video players to run on the CPU. This is because video players can have issues with AMD graphics cards. AMD drivers also have plenty of other weird issues. TLDR, AMD is a no-go, and Intel Arc is out of the question. Okay, NVIDIA GPUs, but which one? One factor important to graphics cards is VRAM, or video memory. This memory is used to store data important to graphics, such as assets like textures. The low amount of VRAM on NVIDIA cards has been causing controversy recently, with reviewers like Hardware Unboxed stating that the minimum amount in 2023 should be 12 gigabytes. I would also say that should be the case for VR, because if you play at higher resolutions, like that of a VR headset, you are inevitably going to need more VRAM. Not only that, if you play VRChat, you need more VRAM. Because it is all user-generated content, the majority of it is notoriously unoptimized, including textures. Many of the textures are 4K, or 4096 pixels squared. Since textures, and any data for that matter, needs to be decompressed before being put into RAM or VRAM, textures of the same size take up the same amount of VRAM. This adds up quickly as detailed in some other videos. With only 8 gigabytes of VRAM, you will likely run out in an instance with more than 24 people. The best thing to help your own performance, regardless of your system, is to use reasonable download and safety settings. Best thing you can do to help the performance of others is to optimize your own avatars, including lowering the texture sizes. See this video on Sipbox's channel. In addition, make multiple separate avatars for different outfits, rather than having a single model with many toggles. Yes, even when most of the avatar is toggled off, it still greatly reduces performance compared to a more optimized one. Since VRAM is now a metric measured by VRChat, in my opinion, there should be options to improve or optimize usage so as not to hit the maximum. That, and there should be options in the VRC SDK to let users easily optimize their avatars. So then, 12 gigabytes minimum, the more the better. The problem with NVIDIA cards is that at the time of recording, if you want to get more than 12 gigabytes, you need to spend at least $1,200 US. That is absurd. If you want more than that, you need to pick up a prohibitively expensive card like a 3090 or 4090, the latter of which starts at $1,600. If you're like most people, I have immense difficulty in recommending those, especially the $1,200 4080, which is terrible value. But if you have money to burn, then go for it. For the rest of us, there honestly aren't that many 12 gigabyte NVIDIA cards to choose from. This leaves the 3060 12GB, 4070, and 4070 Ti. The 3080 and 3080 Ti are both only sold used these days, and I'd only recommend them over the 4070 if you can find them for a good price. If you want the absolute cheapest, then you can go with the 3060, but just make sure to get the 12GB version and not the lower spec 8GB version. Shame on you, NVIDIA, for releasing a card with the same name and noticeably less performance. The 4070 isn't terrific value, but out of all the GPUs right now, it's probably the one I'd recommend most people go with. The 4070 Ti just isn't great value, which makes it a tough sell. NVIDIA recently announced two 4060 Ti's in the 4060. My recommendations still stay in place. Hardware Unboxed says the 4060 Ti 8GB is dead on arrival at $400, and I'd have to agree with them there. The 3060 Ti 16GB is terrible value at $500. So even though it has more VRAM, I can't recommend it because the rasterization performance isn't high enough for the asking price. I will, however, probably recommend the 4060 along with the 3060 12GB. The 4060 will be cheaper at $300 compared to the 3060 12GB, which is currently at $350, and it's expected to perform around 15% better in normal rasterization. Even though the 4060 will only have 8GB of VRAM, you should be fine for the next few years if you turn down the texture quality settings and maybe even the resolution. In VRChat's performance settings, you should block very poor ranked avatars because in a recent update, VRChat adjusted the safety settings to account for not going over 8GB of VRAM. In the most recent flat screen titles, you'll probably have to turn down the texture quality, turn off ray tracing, and enable upscaling technologies like DLSS. TLDR, go with either the 3060, 4070, 4070 Ti, or 4090, whatever fits your budget. 4070 is my recommendation for most people. I already recorded these extra sections of the script I wrote, but I don't have the time to edit this video before I leave for vacation. These other sections aren't as important because they cover general PC building, not anything specific to VR. I'll put the script on screen because I think some will find it useful, but I also felt that the video was getting long enough as is, and there are plenty of other resources that can help you build a PC, many of which have more expertise than I do. There you have it, the best PC parts for VR in 2023. Let me know in the comments what you think. Just don't ask me a bunch of questions, this isn't Reddit. Thanks again to my patrons for helping me make this a reality. If you'd like to support my work, consider checking out my Patreon. Thanks for watching.